Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is a prequel to the Harry Potter series set in New York City slightly after the First World War and during a time of growing global paranoia about the rise of Gellert Grindelwald. The main character is Newt Scamander, a magizoologist and wizarding conservationalist who travels around the world to both learn about and educate his fellow wizards on the true nature of various magical beasts. He comes to America to release a giant magical eagle, but after being distracted by a strange woman giving a sermon that is anti-magic, more on that in a bit, his bag is mixed up with that of a muggle, or no-mage as they say in this film, and the other man winds up accidentally releasing some of the beasts from Scamander's menagerie. Scamander is arrested by a disgraced Auror named Tina, who winds up taking both men to her apartment, where we also meet her mind-reading sister Queenie. The No-Mage, who is easily the most interesting character in the film, is just an ordinary working-class guy named Jacob who is accidentally drawn into the world of wizardry. The thing about this film is there really are two stories going on simultaneously. On the one hand, Newt, Jacob, Tina, and Queenie are going all over New York City trying to round up the fantastic beasts that escaped from Newt's trunk before they can cause more mayhem or possibly expose the wizarding world. The other story has to do with a society called the New Salemers, who are essentially religious nutjobs who want to expose and destroy wizards and witches. One of the agents of the Magical Congress of the United States is Percival Graves, who is trying to hunt down Newt as he believes Newt's creatures are to blame for a rash of disasters and murders, but Newt believes the damage is caused by something called an Obscurus, a young wizard who has oppressed their own power for whatever reason, and it unleashes itself as a violent storm of chaotic magic. Without giving away spoilers, the two plots do coincide with each other, as Graves has a second agenda to find a young wizard who may be under their control. So, essentially, if you're familiar with Harry Potter, maybe you've read the 7 books or seen the 8 movies, a lot of this is going to be very familiar, the same sort of spells, creatures, and abilities that you've seen before, but in a very different setting. We see how wizarding law differs in the United States as opposed to Britain, and we're also seeing them in a vastly different time period, and Scamander is a vastly different sort of protagonist from Harry Potter. He is somewhat eccentric and flighty, but also seriously skilled and confident. Tina comes off as repressed and thirsty to be recognized for her abilities, Queenie is a classic old New York vamp, and Jacob is just a regular guy, and he's the key to why this movie works. What made Harry Potter work for so many people, whether it was in book form or movie form, was that Harry was an outsider, raised by muggles, who was being drawn into the magical world. We could identify with him because he grew up as an ordinary kid, albeit an abused and neglected one. Jacob is just a blue-collar guy with a dream. He works in a cannery and wants to open a bakery, but has difficulty getting a loan. He's drawn into this world and initially thinks that it's all a dream, until he realizes that he's not smart enough to come up with all this shit. He shares an attraction with Queenie, which would be an ordinary, tacked-on love story that doesn't add much if it wasn't for the fact that, at least in this time period, wizards in America were forbidding from having any sorts of relationships with no-mages, which lends a slightly tragic story to it. Although the viewer is likely seen or read Harry Potter before and is probably vastly familiar with this world, the movie brings back the wonder of it, firstly by changing both time and place, and secondly by having Jacob be a completely ordinary muggle who enters this world unwillingly but fits in with it nonetheless. Another thing to mention is the movie ventures into some seriously dark territory. While this isn't new for the Harry Potter universe, this is essentially the start of a new series that also gave us marketing that it would be a madcap adventure with a sort of nutty wizard version of Dr. Dolittle looking for escaped creatures in New York City, but there's a really nasty undertone to the film. The movie is set far back enough that World War II isn't quite looming yet, but Hitler's magical counterpart Grindelwald is already known and is gathering followers. The movie hits some themes that I didn't expect. For example, in real life, many countries around the world, including America, dabbled with eugenics prior to World War II, showing people how horrible it actually was. And in this film, we see the American wizards having a very cold and paranoid view towards muggles, going so far as to summarily execute anyone who might expose their world to the general public, and speaking of which, the execution scene is pretty goddamn terrifying. The New Salem Society is like a twisted orphanage run by a Shirley Phelps-type villain, and the idea of an Obscurus, a doomed child who can literally explode violently with magic, is the kind of horrifying idea only the mind that came up with shit like Horcruxes could come up with. That being said, I do have a few minor quibbling issues. Scamander is interesting and fun, but he doesn't get enough character development. We get a hint at him being involved with one of the Lestranges in the past. We get a throwaway line that he was thrown out of Hogwarts for endangering students. Honestly, he has the same backstory as Hagrid, and I would have liked for him to be more fleshed out. Though I was happy with how Tina, Jacob, and Queenie were fleshed out. My other issue is the lack of a central villain to really tie it together. The New Salem Society are surely evil, but mostly regarded as kooks who hand out leaflets. Graves' motivations aren't known until the very end, and I really couldn't tell you what they are without spoiling it. And while the Obscurus is set up brilliantly with a nice red herring, the actual character is too interesting and tragic to have gotten so little screen time. Overall, Fantastic Beasts is very concerned with world building, which a prequel should be, but perhaps it could have focused a bit more on its central character. I give it an 8 out of 10. It's not quite up there with the best in the Harry Potter universe, but is quite good nonetheless, and definitely a more worthy successor to the series than that play that I won't speak of.